Hi, Shane. Thanks for your time today. I hope you are well.
Thank you.
My question concerns the extra year restoration of the year of eligibility for the spring athletes. You talk a little bit about the ramifications, for the rosters, for scholarships. I think you touched on it a minute ago. Who will be funding those extra scholarships in the coming year?
Yeah, Jerry. I mean, again, it's given back to the institution and its authority to grant the extra year and look at the financial aid limitations. And it seems on the surface it was an easy answer, but the ramifications. Where does this impact? You have returning seniors that would come back. You have the incoming student athletes, and then ultimately your prospective student athletes. So your roster size, who does that impact? Ultimately, I think the right decision was made by the council to grant that seasons of competition, back to the seniors. And some will take advantage of that. Some will not take advantage of that. So that's still left to be seen. But then you also, as you mentioned, Jerry, had the financial aid limits. And obviously, if you did not grant the exception, then you were really going to impact a lot of the freshmen and people that had already committed to your institution. So what the council ended up doing was saying that those scholarships for those seniors only, for 1 year only, would not count towards those limitations. So, I'll just use baseball, for example, has 11.7 scholarships. If you had two baseball players in the equivalency sport at a half a scholarship each, next year you're going to be at 12.7, understanding that those two seniors that would be coming back at are 50% each, that 1 year you would be allowed to be at 12.7. Again, this will be worked through from institution to institution of how they're going to handle it and the financial ramifications of that, but it does give the flexibility back to campuses to handle.
All right, next up we have Coach Hunter.
Yeah, Shane, was wondering about the construction aspect of things. Obviously, the Pushkar Center is in the midst of renovations. You've got a lot of other projects. Do you have to put a lot of things on hold? Where are you now in all that area? Yeah,
we've had a lot of continued discussions, Greg, on campus of what that's going to look like and moving forward. It's the construction, March Weston, we're leaning on them. They're still in business, and to my understanding that they're continuing to work as we talk. We're hoping that there's no delays in materials and different things that we could receive, but there are other projects that we're reviewing that had not started. But the Pushkar Center, the video boards, the seating in the Coliseum, we're continuing to move forward with those projects as expected, hoping there would not be any type of delays with any of that. Obviously, you have manufacturing and different things in different states that are occurring, but the work here on campus right now is moving forward, and that's our hope, and continuing to have those and have those completed, in the deadline dates specifically. With football and the lower floor there would be the locker room and everything by early August.
Just a reminder to click participants and click raise hand if you have a question for Director Lyons. Kevin Kinder, go ahead.
Hi, Shane. Thanks again for taking the time to be with us today. A question about the budget things. I know a lot of this is going to be speculative. Where are you right now in looking at different alternatives? That is, say, football pushed back, no fans, the, lower disbursements from the NCAA. Are you doing like different projections for each sport, what that could mean, and what kind of numbers those will be for the next year?
Yeah, Kevin, we continue to look at that, and as that becomes more crystallized as time moves forward. But obviously, we know for a fact that now the NCAA distribution will ultimately be, for the conference, probably about $10 or $11 million short of what we expected. I think Commissioner Bowlesby said last week that we were expecting about $24 million that were budgeted. Under our understanding, we'll get about $13 million back, from the Big 12, from the NCAA. So that's approximately, a little over $1 million per institution there. You have the ticket sales in the Big 12, which were about $6.6 million in ticket sales, of not having the men's basketball tournament in Kansas City. So you're looking somewhere, roughly $2 to $2.5 million is what we're projecting as, revenue that will not be coming in. So, Simon Dover, who's my chief financial officer, is continuing to work on that on a daily basis with the conference office. There's some reserves, different things that, from the conference office, that those distributions can be looked at and how that will impact, our department. Right now we do have, the spring sports that there's some savings in the sense of, we're not traveling, we're not competing. So what does that look like, by the end of the fiscal year as well? So, all that taken into account, yes, there's going to be a revenue loss, but just a matter of, what does that look like and what does that look like in the future? You're probably questioning, I think you mentioned to Kevin, of, in the future, and in my hopes, and I'm very optimistic that we will be playing football, come September, and preseason will start on time in August. But what does it look like for the general public and the fans showing up and ticket sales? It's still, very early on right now to project what that's going to look like. Obviously, there's a lot of people out of jobs, which is very, very unfortunate. There's a lot of people with the pandemic. It's not going to go away overnight. So, is there a little bit of not wanting to come to the competitions and be in that big of large of a crowd? So there's a number of factors that we have to look at, but we don't have all that at this point. And, we'll continue to evaluate that and try to make decisions as we move forward.
All right, Shane, Bob Herzl emailed us in a question. If this takes longer than anticipated, like goes through Christmas before we get a Christmas miracle, has it been discussed, thought of, or possible to start football in February, then play an abbreviated season, maybe just a conference schedule and a championship game in April and May, then take a month off or so and start conditioning in the middle of July and play next year's schedule starting in September?
Yeah, Bob, I mean, right now our projections based upon the medical experts, we haven't got to that point. Based on my conversations, they feel that once we get to late summer, August area, that, that normal life would hopefully be back, all across the U.S. So that's kind of our hope. It's my understanding, some recent phone calls in the last 48 hours that the pandemic will spike here in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And if you use the approach and look at, what we've learned from China, they were saying after the spike, it was roughly, 3 months that they got, starting to get back to normal. So if you look at that from us, the spike would occur later this month. And hopefully that would be the case. And then it starts to flatten out. And by, late summer that we're ready to play football. What we need to be prepared, as a football oversight in the football community, is making sure when those student athletes return that the preseason schedule looks a little different of, they haven't been here maybe potentially in the summer. We're planning right now for them to be here in the summer to train and condition. But what if that doesn't happen? What does that preseason look at like? You currently have the 5 days of acclimatization. Does that change to say that it has to be 10 or 14 days of acclimatization period to make sure the health and safety of the football student athletes are first and foremost instead of rushing through it? So that's what we'll be discussing, as time goes in here in the next couple of weeks of what that looks like. To answer your question about, whether football will be played later in the fall or in the winter, that's, as this goes through and we get more information, I think we're planning on starting on August. But if another month rolls around and the medical advice is being said that, hey, this is going to take longer than we thought, as I mentioned earlier, this thing's not going to go away. What does that look like? then I think we will continue to have those discussions to say, is it delayed? Is it pushed back? Does it go over 2 semesters? But the most important thing is that, you know, this is just not about college football. This is about higher education. And, you know, it's you know, not only is the question about whether football is going to start in August, the question is whether school's going to start in August. So, you know, we go hand in hand with higher education. And if our students, you know, across the country are not returning to campuses, you know, it's hard for us as athletic directors and administrators to say that football is going to start. So, you know, there's continued discussions with our presidents and chancellors as we move through this and trying to get as much information as we can to make the best decisions that we can.
All right. Go ahead, Derek Red.
Hey, Shane. 2 questions, really. First of all, in talking with other athletic directors around the country, are they sharing in your optimism in football being able to start in August as you hope? And second, how tough is it because of just the unknown nature of this, and there's something new that just this virus kind of evolves every day? How tough is it to plan far in advance because you never know what comes up? Or do you guys have do you guys go into like stages of, okay, we're going to get to this date and then this is the plan here, and then and after that we're going to move to this target date and then this target date?
Yeah, thanks, Derek. Yeah, great questions. And I think the answers, you know, to that is, yes, there's some athletic directors around the country that share my optimism. You know, I have a lot of faith in our medical field and our scientists that hopefully that there is some type of things they can come up with, maybe not, you know, necessarily a vaccine that prevents it, but is there medication? Do they come up with something in the short term? And this is just not the U.S., this is worldwide. So, you know, I'm very optimistic that, you know, they're working around the clock to hopefully come up with something that, you know, if you do get the virus, that it can be cured. And again, there's other people on the other side of the fence that doesn't think this is going to happen. So I think that's worldwide. You know, there's optimists and there's pessimists, and I'm being more optimistic at this point. It's hard to say, you know, what does 5 months look like? So, you know, let's plan on, you know, 8-10 weeks out and then making your plan. So it really goes into your second question of the planning aspect. And I think you're right. As we move forward, you know, we're making decisions based upon the medical advice and, you know, looking at the pandemic and what our medical experts are saying of spikes and, you know, when they think life is going to get back to normal. So, you know, what we're planning on now is we're actually looking at and discussions about, you know, the ability of student athletes to come back in June and start conditioning and potentially even, you know, some practices if they missed spring practices, you know, helmets only, or the OTAs as we refer to try to have some equal footing there. And then you plan out from that point. If that doesn't happen, what's your next plan? So, you know, I think right now our plan is to look at everything's moving forward. The next 2 weeks will tell us a better story. A month from now will tell us, you know, everything becomes more crystallized, and that's what we're trying to focus on, as opposed to, you know, throwing it out. It's not going to happen, you know. And again, I have to work, and I think other athletic directors have to work hand in hand with our chancellors and presidents of what's happening on campus. So that's a big question out there as well of what's our campuses look like, you know, come August.
All right, we have the next question from Alex Hickey.
Hey, Shane, you had mentioned earlier, obviously, the discretion of each institution as far as the continuing for seniors, the grant and aid next year. Have you made decisions yet for West Virginia what your discretion is going to look like in regards to that?
We have not, Alex. You know, just getting that information Monday night. You know, I know some of my sport administrators are in discussions with student athletes that those would be returning. You know, for us, that's, you know, golf, track, or men's golf, track, rowing, and a few baseball players. So it's just a matter of us sitting down with the student athletes and figuring out if they, again, the emotions when this happens is like anything. It's, I want to play another year. Now that time has gone by, they're going to finish their degrees and graduate. Is their hopes and what they want to do is come back for next year. So we have to start those conversations with them now, and then start trying to figure out from that standpoint how we move forward. So, I do have, some conversations going on right now with my sport administrators that work with those specific sports to talk to the coaches, in turn for the coaches to talk to their student athletes of, what they think they're going to do for next year. So we're really at the front end of this, and, we'll be making decisions of what that looks like, in the coming weeks.
All right, go ahead, Mike Kazaza.
Hey, Shane, how are you?
Good, Mike. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for doing this. Appreciate it. I was just curious about again, not to get too hypothetical, but one thing you've seen with different sports and the possibilities of resuming or beginning competitions, playing with no audience. I wonder if that's a non-starter for college football because of the income attached to gates and specifically season tickets. How much of a divisive issue could that be, or how critical, or maybe how much we're putting too much stock into that?
Well, I mean, it's a great question. I don't think we have the answer to, but again, I think it's throwing all the different options out on the table, and what does that look like? Overall, obviously there's revenue in your tickets, but there's significant revenue, from our television, partners as well. So what does that look like? But, I think the question comes back to, what does society look like? We're not going to do anything that puts harm in the way of one of our student athletes, but ultimately our fan base as well. So it's continuing to get as much education as we can from the medical experts to say, what's a viable option, for, our sport programs. And, they may say, among the teams, you can have a team out there, but we don't want 60,000 people showing up to football stadiums and playing football games. So that's something that we'll continue to have to work through. But I think, we have to look at it to say, that, our biggest revenue stream as an athletic department is through our football programs. So I think as athletic directors, and, I think Derek had asked it earlier, is, how do we salvage the football season and as we go through this? And we're going to have to be very flexible, in our approach. And again, it's not a date certain. It's hard in this whole pandemic because you just can't say this thing goes away on July 1st and life will be back to normal. It's a matter of this is going to be with us for months and months to come. So what does that look like? And what's the advice of the medical experts, of our government, of our states, of our campuses? So there's just a lot of collaboration and discussions that's going to have to be had, over the coming weeks.
All right, go ahead, Alan Taylor.
Hey, thanks for hosting, Shane. Given the fact that, universities are obviously going to feel a crunch, and I'm guessing that some subsidies are going to go away, at least in the short term, has there even been any discussion about, the potential for head coaches to, give back some salary for a year like some of these CEOs are doing? I mean, is that even a contingency plan yet?
It's, and again, I think you all saw the news that came from the NCAA staff yesterday of taking their upper staff of the Mark Emmert and his upper echelon, taking a 20% cut and 10% cut, the level below. And again, that ultimately came as a surprise, that we as institutions didn't know that was coming. We really haven't had that discussion, at this point yet with the conferences. We haven't had it, internally. I think it was asked earlier, we're just a matter of trying to look at the budgets and trying to remain whole as we move forward. And again, time will tell what that's going to look like with, different revenue streams and ticket sales and whether we're going to play, football next year and when we're going to play football. So all that is thrown into the pot that we're going to have to look at, but no decisions at this point, Alan, has been made about that topic.
Go ahead, Sean Manning.
Hey, Shane, to move away from the current events real quick, next basketball season is the last pit game on this current deal. Is there any talks to have that extended, continued? And if not, is that something you would like to see continued?
Yeah, I'd love to see it continued. I've had a couple conversations with Heather Like at Pitt, one after our last game up there. So it was November when we played, and knowing this was going to be the last year. I think she's on the same page as me, and talking to Coach Huggins as well. We'd love to see that series continue. So we will, be in discussions with Pitt and talking about extending that series. As unfortunately, all this has taken all of our time and dealing with the pandemic as we talk. But that's going to be something that's definitely on the list to extend that series with Pitt in basketball.
Go ahead, Kevin Kender.
A couple of follow-ups on the finances, Shane. You mentioned potential cost savings, for not having to travel, things like that for the spring sports. Are there any other, at least positives for the estimate you're doing right now? And specifically, I was thinking of insurance, any insurance you may have for, loss of the continuity of this. And the other thing is, do you have like a high-end figure yet of if, say, all of the seniors wanted to come back for next year, what would be your total amount that you might have to lay out to support those student athletes for another year?
Yeah, I mean, we have, and I think we're consistent based on the number of sports, Kevin, that we sponsor. We're probably looking at, $450,000 to $500,000 additional expense if all those student athletes returned, that year. So that's something we'll have to look at. Just overall from the financial picture, we continue every day, looking at it and what that means. And so, it's just a lot of unknowns at this point and, how we're going to operate, obviously with some of the stuff, that we're doing here, we've tried to work now with the new policy that, we'll be sending out, even though we're not in school, we talk about the new pandemic policy of, what we're doing. So we are in the next several days, we'll be sending out some packages to our student athletes that, will allow us from a nutritional standpoint to get them the nutritional supplements, vitamins, the whey proteins, those type of things, some bands and rollers and things that they need to do from home. So that's on the permissible list. So there'll be expenses there that we have to incur. It's just different that they're not here on campus, but what we can do and have to get that information or those materials and supplements and the rollers and bands and stuff to them. So that's a cost that we'll start incurring here in the interim time. So, again, just a lot of this is day to day as we move forward and looking at the finances as a whole and trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
All right, Greg Hunter, you're up.
Shane, you mentioned the nutritionists can have some contact. What about the academic advisors to make sure that, the student athletes are good to go when their seasons do come about?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Greg. That was one of the top priorities, that they can have, obviously, unlimited academic support with our academic staff. And, again, this is all new to the way academic support's going to work through. Steve Urias on my staff oversees the academic area in totality, as well as the nutrition area. But we're working with, everyone in our academic staff. There's been situations where student athletes haven't had the appropriate equipment, laptops, different things at home. I know we've shipped some laptops to make sure that they have the equipment to make sure they're doing their work at home. And again, I got off a call earlier this morning with campus, and they're doing the same thing for regular students. So our academic support in I'd ask the question, some of the student athletes of, have some online courses previously, but some had not. And, those courses that weren't necessarily geared to be, online is now, the word I heard is just kind of awkward. So it's a new way of doing it. We'll work through it, but 100% we'll make sure that our student athletes have all the necessary resources, not just because they're not here on campus, but as much as we can do virtually, from academic support and tutoring, we're going to make sure that happens.
Go ahead, Mike Kazaza.
Shane, not to fixate on the May 31 date, but it doesn't seem like it's reasonable to turn the calendar from the end of May to the start of June and just resume sports. From a logistical standpoint, what do we think people are missing as far as kind of getting the ball rolling again, and how long would that take so you could resume to quote unquote normal?
Yeah, I mean, from what I've heard, I mean, you're I mean, that's and that's another $1 million question, Mike. But you're not going to come back. Let's just say that we start getting the intelligence that that May 31st will be the last day, and student athletes can start returning. What does that look like? Again, you're only having some sports, football being one that's allowed. The permissible summer workouts. You have basketball that has some legislation that's in place. So those sports who have that, what does that look like? And again, we don't have all the answers to that, but it's just not coming back, jumping in, full steam. It's a matter of, acclimatization coming back and working through that. And I'll lean on my strength and conditioning staffs to make sure we have a plan as we move forward. And it goes to, same thing. If we don't have summer, what does that look like coming back in August for our football teams, our soccer teams, et cetera? Football is going to lead the way with this, but you have other sports in there as well, volleyball that starts in August. So it's just not jumping in, like you normally would. It's a matter of probably a lot of different testing and different things for our student athletes from a physical and well-being standpoint, and working through that at a different structure than we've been used to.
Go ahead, Alex Hickey.
This is kind of working off the question that Bob sent into you, but within the Big 12, how many different scenarios so far have been sort of created, or are you even at that stage yet with potential different ways to get the football season in? Just how many options are being looked at?
Right now, Alex, and yesterday was probably our first time that from the Big 12 that we even broached the subject about fall football. Our focus has been what do we do right now in real time. Not to say that August isn't going to be important, because it's going to be very important, but real time was what are we doing with the student athletes here now? What are we doing with spring? What are we doing with their workouts? So all those, it consumed all of our time the last 2.5 to 3 weeks to come up with the pandemic policy. Now that we've got that, and it's not only, and I re-emphasize this, and that was not only the Big 12, that's across all Autonomy 5 conferences of the ACC, Big 10, Pac-12, SEC, that we're all singing from the same hymnal here. So now the next step is starting to talk about summer and football in the fall and how that falls into place. And there's time will tell of what our decisions have to be as we continue to get more information back from our medical experts and move forward. So right now our plan is to discuss what is August looking like. And then I think we start to have the conversations of, if August isn't available or can start in August, what does that mean, and what does other things look like? And, again, it seems easy, but you have a lot of other ramifications. You have facility issues, that if you play in a pro stadium, what does that look like, home and away? If you push the season too far, what does that do with the bowl seasons? They have contracts with facilities and what does that look like? So, there's just a lot of, things that have to be worked through, as we continue these discussions. But I do think, and this is just, my personal opinion, it's a little bit premature to start talking about, moving football, into fall and winter. Let's go the next couple, 2 or 3 weeks and focus on what information I'm receiving is that, we'll be ready to play football come August. And that's what I'm going to focus on is we're playing, football in August. If May 1st rolls around and they're saying, well, that date doesn't look possible, then we start making adjustments more then.
Go ahead, Keenan Cummings.
Hey Shane, thanks for doing this. I guess perfect world. Optimistically, football starts on time. If it doesn't, have you guys started to have any preliminary discussions about maybe worst case scenario or fans not in the stands with ticket refunds, donations, that type of deal, or is that just something you do later on?
I think Keenan, I think that's something we're going to do later on. I'm moving forward, and I'm going to be the optimist and say we're going to play football in August. Until another month or so rolls around and the medical experts say that's not going to happen, then I'll start making adjustments. And I've always said my whole life, the world's about adapt and adjust, and that's what I'm doing each and every day is adapting and adjusting to the information. So I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here and start planning on something on hypotheticals. There could be hypotheticals. I can throw out to say, what if we're not going to have basketball season next year? Well, that starts getting in too far out to even start that discussion. So I want to focus on and be an optimist to say right now, based on the medical experts and the information I'm receiving, that come August, we're going to be playing football. In a month from now, if I get different information that has to be shifted, then I'll adapt and adjust and start looking at that. But, all this that you hear out in the national media and people talking about there's not going to be football season, I think it's foolish to say that right now. I think they can, what I'm being told and the medical experts, there's a great possibility that we're going to be playing football. That's what I'm going to focus on. And then if information comes in the next 15 to 30 days that's different, then we'll start focusing on something else.
Just a reminder, if you have a question, go ahead and click participants, then raise hand. Otherwise, this is the final question from Greg Hunter.
I guess I get the last one then. Maybe Shane, until about a month ago, it looked like there would be several national issues that were addressed this summer: name, image, and likeness, immediately eligible transfer, some of those things. Do you think that's completely off the board for this summer, or will nationally some of these things still be addressed?
No, my understanding, Greg, is we're moving forward. Obviously, they haven't had as much discussion in the last couple of weeks as they were before, but it's my understanding that the name, image, likeness working groups are continuing to work. There's an expectation that there's a report at the end of this month now back to the council and to the board of directors. The transfer waivers working group, is continuing their work. I do think that one, based upon just recommendations, I don't think it has anything to do with the pandemic, is, that the council will not act on anything in April, to my understanding. Those meetings, just like everything around our country, Greg, those meetings have now turned to virtual meetings. They won't be in person at the end of this month. And the same thing with conference meetings next month. Those have been canceled, and those will all be done by conference call and virtually as well. But the name, image, likeness will continue moving forward, and we'll continue to get more information about that in the coming weeks as well.
Mike Kazaza slips one in here. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, sorry about that, Greg. You can have another one if you want to. It seems like you have more and more student athletes who are back on campus who are slowly making their way here, who just don't have a lot to do at home, or who have better resources and quality of life here right now. What sense do you have of that, and what type of counsel or advice are they getting so they do their part to flatten the curve, so to speak?
Yeah, we continue to send out information, to our student athletes to flatten the curve and to stay home and social distancing and working through that from an educational standpoint. From a campus, the safest place for them to be is at home. Obviously we had those who stayed here. I think campus in general, there's been some students, but not a whole lot based on the call I had earlier this morning, from campus. There's been a trickle of some students coming back. I think the same thing for student athletes. Kelly Zeno, my staff, has done a great job of working with campus, and we're going to follow the policies of the governor, the policies of the CDC, of saying if you're coming from one of those areas that is a hot spot, then you're to be self-quarantined for 14 days. We want our student athletes to follow that. From my understanding, there's been those situations where they're asymptomatic, that they don't know they have it, but they could be spreading it and never have the symptoms whatsoever. So we need to be extra cautious as we move forward. This is a serious issue, a serious matter. And I think our student athletes understand that, and understand that, if they come back to campus, there are policies and procedures that have to be followed, not only from the athletic department, but from other entities to make sure that we flatten the curve as much as possible.
All right, that looks like all we have. I guess I'll kick it to you and Michael there if you have any other things you guys want to add. Michael?
I'd just like to say that we've had 32 participants on here today. I want to thank members of the media for joining us. I'd like to thank Director Lyons for his time. And Grant, thank you for being a great technical director. And Director Lyons will just close with his message that he has for Mountaineer fans.
Well, again, thank you all for being here. This is obviously unique time that we're all experiencing, not only in athletics, but in our country. We're going to continue doing our part of, the quarantine and making sure that we don't have the spread. But at the same time, we need to continue working for our student athletes, our fan bases, as we move forward for the health and safety of them. So thank you all for being here. And as always, close, let's go Mountaineers.